So Whistlin Diesel just got arrested again. And before you think this is just another influencer drama story, this one's actually a masterclass in what not to do with your taxes, especially if you're making big money online or you're a famous person. So we're going to break down exactly what happened, why this keeps happening to creators and influencers, and most importantly, what you need to know so this never happens to you. All right, so let's get one thing out of the way early on here. Cody Detweiler, Whistlin Diesel, he's innocent until proven guilty. And he knows what the facts are of this case, but I don't. But this is really important because I have a feeling he hopped on a trend that a lot of car guys have hopped on. And I don't know if he did it the right way or the wrong way. I'm going to teach you the right way to try and save some money on your taxes when it comes to buying a car. And hopefully Cody avoided doing it the wrong way so they don't make an example of him. So back in November, Whistlin Diesel got arrested for tax evasion related to a Ferrari F8 Tributo. This is a $400,000 car. And if you're familiar with Whistlin Diesel's videos,
the vehicles are on fire. We need a fire department immediately.
They're hard to watch, but they're also really hard to turn away from. And with this particular car, after he just abused this thing, he ended up driving it out into a cornfield and it caught on fire. But that's not what he was arrested for, even though that causes people like me a whole lot of pain to watch. Cody was arrested back in November for tax evasion. And it appears that the state of Tennessee, not the IRS, not the federal government, but the state of Tennessee has come after him because he didn't pay sales tax on that vehicle. And here's what I know about what he did. This Ferrari F8 had Montana plates on it. And this is a pretty common strategy for people that buy high-end vehicles is they register the car in Montana, and I'll talk a little bit more about the details there, because Montana has very cheap registration fees, has no annual inspection or emissions, and most importantly, has no sales tax. So in Cody's case, with this $400,000 car, if he avoids paying sales tax, he's in Tennessee, which depending on what county, could be anywhere from 7 to 9%. Even at a 7% sales tax rate, this is $28,000 of taxes. So yeah, if there's a way to avoid that, even if you're making the type of money that this guy appears to be making, everybody would want to save $28,000. But he may have done it wrong, and we're only going to find out as this case proceeds. So here's the common strategy for how we typically see people try to do this. And I was just reading a whole bunch of really bad advice on various social media channels about how to do this. But here's the general idea. It's pretty cheap and easy to set up a Montana limited liability company. And then when you go and buy your high-end vehicle, this is not worth the headache for a $50,000 car. When you go buy your high-end vehicle, you can then register it to that LLC in Montana. And there's a couple other hoops to jump through. You need your registered agent there. You need an actual address there, which the registered agent provides for you. But then you can avoid paying the sales tax. And you throw Montana plates on the thing and you go and drive it around. The problem is, it's not that simple, and too many people think it's that simple. In fact, last year, when I bought a $300,000 motorhome, the sales guy was telling me to register it in Montana. Here's some free advice. Don't take tax advice from car salesmen or RV salesmen. So we know that Cody's car had Montana plates on it. We can fairly assume that he set up some sort of LLC to register this vehicle in it, and as a result, didn't pay sales taxes to the state of Tennessee. And here's where the problems arise. Cody was arrested and charged with filing a false sales and use tax return. And I think most people have an idea of how sales tax works. When you walk into a store and you buy something, they add on the 6 or 7 or 8 or 15% tax on top of that. But where states are starting to crack down on this is if you purchase an item in a different state, but you bring it to your home state, they may want you to pay use tax on that. Even if you buy a vehicle in a different state and bring it to your home state, the dealerships usually help you figure out how to pay the sales tax in the state where you're going to use the vehicle. So you can't save money just by buying a car in a state that has a lower tax rate, because you're going to end up paying it in the state where you store the car and where you drive the car. And this is the problem that comes up with Whistlin Diesel and other people that have been charged with similar crimes is they think they get away with it by registering the car in Montana and not paying sales tax, but the state where the car is stored and used says, hey, you owe us tax on this thing. And that's why he was arrested. Fast forward to January of 2026, and he was arrested again. And it sounds like this involves a different vehicle. And if you're familiar with Cody's channel, if you're familiar with the Whistlin Diesel channel, you know this guy cycles through a lot of cars. And some of these things are on the higher end of the market for car prices. So we don't know particularly what these charges are, what vehicle, or even what video it involves. But I have a feeling it's going to be another instance where he bought a really expensive car and registered it in Montana. I think Whistlin Diesel is the most high-profile case that we've seen like this. But even back in April of last year, Car and Driver mentioned how other states are starting to crack down on this supposed loophole. Here's one thing that really caught my attention. 1.1 million people live in Montana, yet somehow they have the highest car ownership by population, double that of California, which tells me that a whole lot of people are trying to take advantage of this loophole or this strategy. And most concerning is I'm going to bet most of them don't do it right, because most of the information and the advice that I see online tells you the wrong way to do this. So interestingly, in this Car and Driver article, they talk about the high-end brands in Montana, and there are 11,000 registrations of high-end cars: Aston Martin, Bugatti, McLaren, Pagani. Half of those registrations are for Ferraris. So if you're going to go and buy a couple $100,000 car and you want to save $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 on that, or even if you go and buy $1 million Ferrari and you want to save 70 grand on your sales taxes, it appears that this might be a really interesting strategy. However, the states where you actually use those cars want a piece of that. They want their taxes on this, so they're starting to crack down on it.
This is for tax evasion,
So before we get into the right ways and the wrong ways to take advantage of this strategy, let's address two things that Cody mentions pretty publicly about this arrest and free legal advice. If you're ever arrested, shut up. You're not going to win the case in the media. So one of the things that Cody has complained about in some of his videos since the first and the second arrest is he didn't have any notice that this was happening.
My problem is that they didn't try emailing me, texting me, saying what I owe or anything, saying, hey, you owe us this money. There was no attempt to do this amicably, which is the precise reason that I am now no longer going to do this amicably.
And I doubt that a little bit, because in a lot of instances, especially regarding taxes, the taxing authority will send you a letter first. Maybe he missed this thing. Maybe he ignored it foolishly. But that's not really a defense to this. You don't need warning before you get arrested for committing a crime. Again, presumed innocent. They got to prove it all in a court of law. But it's not as if anybody else who commits a crime gets a warning before the cops show up at their door. Oftentimes, they're just going to show up and arrest you. The second thing that he's complained about is he thinks the state is trying to make an example of him just because he's famous. Well, that may actually be true, and that's kind of the price that you pay for fame.
When you're well known on the internet, you become such a target to people who don't want to see you do well. As much as that sounds like I'm saying I'm all that or something, it's just that you become a target the more well known you are.
It's part of the reason we're talking about him right now on this video. This is a high-profile case where we can teach a valuable lesson to other people, so that's exactly what we're going to do today. So we talked about the strategy of setting up a Montana limited liability company, which is fairly cheap and easy to do. We talked about the benefits of cheap registration, no inspections, no emissions testing, and no sales tax. And that's why this strategy is so appealing to so many people. But let's talk about the right ways and the wrong ways to do it. The wrong way is to follow just those steps as I explained to you. If you're going to set up a business like a limited liability company, it actually has to have a legitimate business purpose. And you're going to get in trouble with the IRS and possibly with some states if the only reason this company exists is to avoid paying taxes. And too many people that I've seen on the internet pursue exactly this strategy for exactly that reason. There's no legitimate business reason for having that LLC set up. Now, a bunch of people are going to argue with me and say, well, avoiding taxes can be a business strategy because I'm going to use that money to do other things, but that typically doesn't fly. So let's talk about the right way to do this. And then as I'm explaining this, I want you to think about what a headache this is and what just the administrative and paperwork crap that you're going to have to do so that we can decide whether it's actually worth pursuing this strategy or not. So if you are going to set up a business like this, an LLC like this, in a state where you don't live, such as Montana, that has no sales tax, how can you convince the IRS or these state agencies that you're doing this for a legitimate business purpose? Well, you do that by creating a vehicle leasing business. So you can buy the vehicle in that other state, and anytime somebody wants to use that vehicle, they pay lease payments to you. You can use that LLC to lease the business to yourself. But now we've got to make sure that you're charging adequate rates and that they're actually comparable to market rates, because again, this has got to be a business purpose. It's got to be profitable. So now you're going to run into issues with potential income tax implications, because if you set up a business that loses money year after year after year, the IRS may come knocking at your door because they consider that a hobby and not a business. And you now have to collect those lease payments through the business, deal with all the bookkeeping and tax return headaches that go along with that. And you still have to collect sales tax on those lease payments. So if you're going to lease yourself a car for $2,000 a month, and let's say it's a 6% tax rate, you have to tack on $120 a month for sales tax, which you then have to remit to the state where the vehicle is being used. Now, there is some benefit to doing this. Rather than paying a big fat tax bill up front of 20 or 30 grand, you break it down into bite-sized pieces month after month after month. There can be some cash flow benefit to that, but it's going to be a huge headache. All of the paperwork, all the bookkeeping, the additional tax returns that you have to do. So it may not be worth it. Now, interestingly, there is a comparable strategy that people use when they're buying aircraft. So if you buy a plane, whether it's some massive private jet or just a simple single prop general aviation plane, states actually have rules in place that you don't have to pay the sales tax up front as long as you follow the proper rules of leasing that, collecting the use tax or the sales tax when the plane is used, and then remitting that to the state. I did this with my own airplane. Rather than paying the full sales tax bill up front, every hour that I rent that plane to myself, I add sales tax onto there. I have to figure out the rate that has to be collected, and then I remit that back to the state. It's a little bit of a paperwork headache, but there's actually rules in place to make it easy for aircraft owners. No such rule exists for car owners. So is it worth it for you to buy a $100,000 car and register it in Montana if you've got to set up the LLC, handle the lease payments appropriately, consistently every single month, add the sales tax on top of that, and remit it every single month? Well, on a $100,000 car, you might save $6,000 or $7,000 in taxes. That's a lot of brain damage that you're going to suffer. And that's the problem with this strategy, is the easy way that you read about doing it online is just set up the LLC and register it in Montana. The proper way to do it involves a whole lot of extra work. So we have to decide whether it's worth it or not. So I'm going to keep a close eye on how this case progresses, because I think Cody's a really interesting character. And oh yeah, it involves taxes. I hope the case works out for Cody. I hope that he did everything properly. But if not, you're probably going to be seeing a lot more news coverage on this. If you have already purchased a high-end vehicle and you registered it in your LLC in Montana, but you don't have the additional paperwork or the lease payments set up, this is something that you may want to look into. And if you're in the market for a high-end car and you haven't taken advantage of this strategy yet, make sure that you do it the right way. So like and subscribe for the channel, and check out pennywise.tax if you're a business owner and you want to find out more ways that you can legally reduce your tax bill.